The officers' names in this episode have been changed for the safety of their identity. Thank you for understanding. July 18th. There's a strange story coming out of the U.S. Army base at the Presidio in San Francisco, California, over the sighting of a human-like creature walking on all fours with pointed ears and fangs. According to Officer Cadet Patrick McClellan, he was walking back to his quarters around 2:30 a.m., and he heard some strange sounds coming from the nearby forest. He stated that he looked over and saw what appeared to be a naked man with glowing eyes, hunched over right by the edge of the trees. But it wasn't until this same humanoid creature began walking on all fours that McClellan realized something was not right about the situation. This was no man, he realized. McClellan said that the creature jumped over a 5-foot fence with ease before disappearing into the forest. He went on to describe it as being about 6 feet tall, pointy ears, and long fangs protruding from its mouth. This story might have ended there, if not for 2 more reports of the same humanoid creature being sighted around the same area. A few hours later, McClellan's fellow officers told a very similar story of a strange figure crossing the road right in front of their vehicles. This is where it gets interesting, as that particular road was open to only Army personnel. So, this means something from outside the base had somehow gotten in the forest. Another officer told a strikingly similar story about seeing this werewolf-like figure walking on all fours and jumping over a locked gate to get past it. While we can't be sure of what exactly these individuals saw, there really is no other explanation than something very strange was roaming around the Presidio that night. Officer Cadet McClellan says he doesn't want to speculate about what this creature was, but does admit it would be hard for somebody in the area to have an exotic pet without anybody knowing, since it's so vast and remote with many places for animals or people to hide. Whatever was out there is unfortunately no longer around, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. Hopefully somebody gets a good look at this thing the next time it decides to make an appearance. (1987) August 1st. Officer Torgan responded to a call of a possible drunk driver. When he arrived on location, a white male in his early 20s took off running from the officer. The sighting occurred at around 1 a.m. along Highway 44 near Ellingston, Missouri. The deputy requested backup, began to search the area, but could not locate any footprints or tire tracks that may have possibly been left behind by the fleeting suspect. He said, "This is one of the strangest things I have ever put in a report." He returned to his patrol vehicle when suddenly he heard what he describes as a high-pitched humming sound. The next thing the officer knew, in front of him stood a large humanoid creature with an extremely fit and strong build. Its eyes were a deep, piercing black, similar to a pupilless appearance of a shark. The creature's arms hung down, giving it a very ape-like appearance. While its head was humanoid in shape, the nose was pushed flat up against a face with a heavy blow of fall during its lifetime. It had a very wide mouth, filled with lots of tiny razor-sharp teeth. Long strands of stringy hair hung from the back of its head midway down to its back. The officer noted that it appeared as if this humanoid had been living in the woods because the humanoid's skin was dirty, matted, and also gray in color. It stood about 8 feet tall and had very wide shoulders, maybe twice the width of a human shoulder. The witness stated that he was so frightened at the sight before him, he didn't even think to pursue it. He simply got back into his patrol car, returned to his station to fill out the report, which he never intended to release, at least publicly. The witness described this creature as one of the strangest things he's ever put in his report. He stated that when this thing stood before him, it looked like something right out of a horror movie. I know for certain that I saw something very unusual on the night of July 26th while driving home from work. I had not been drinking and was completely sober. I also do not drink caffeine or take any type of stimulant or depressing drugs. When my wife saw the tracks, she believed that they were left by a bear at first, but was informed that there were no bears in the area. In our front yard, we have a large maple tree whose branches hang very low to the ground. The object that I saw at the window was most definitely not a bear. It was standing on two legs, very unlike how a bear stands, and it reached with its arms in an attempt to touch me. It was only about 5 feet away from the window when we both saw each other, making full eye contact. It was frightening. I do not know for sure what I saw, and my wife is just as certain that she saw it also. I have never seen any type of creature that resembled this thing before in my life, and hope to never see one again. Obviously, Officer Torgan here isn't alone, as I just shared my own personal experience. There are things out there that defy the world we live in. Maybe shows like X-Files and Twilight Zone had it right. In 1973, Officer Lamek reported a terrifying sighting of what he believes to be the legendary Mothman. His sighting occurred on Highway 51. Suddenly, in front of him, right above a slow-moving car, was the figure of a man with his wings folded in across his back. The wings appeared to be leathery in texture, like a bat's, and were even pointed on the ends. A sort of sting protruded from the creature's beltline. Officer Lamek stopped his car and tried to get out when he saw the creature taking off flight at an incredible speed. The officer described it as follows. It stood between 6 and 7 feet tall, had a wingspan over 14 feet wide from tip to tip, and large glowing red eyes. It flew at an angle towards the east. It made no noise other than a whooshing sound like air through its wings. It had claws on its feet, and something on its back, looking like 2 cylinders. Officer Lamek reported his sighting to the local PD, where he was laughed at, ridiculed, and finally forced into early retirement for psychological reasons. The officer was told that if he reported another sighting of this kind, he would be brought up on charges of mental instability. It's interesting to note that Lamek is extremely well respected within the community. He's an upstanding member of society, with no history of family or personal mental illness or alcoholism. He is very much a regular guy with a wife and kids. This has been one hard creature to research due to the reluctance of people involved in the case that are willing to talk about it. We immediately went and checked the area where he think we initially came across something, which was just a short distance away. The road in which he saw it circles around, comes back up on the top of itself in an oval-like shape with gravel roads going on in different areas of the farm. We were not able to find anything, but even my son said he thinks he saw something by one of his houses. It's no longer there, but maybe even a garden plot that had been abandoned long ago. The land has been farmed for probably decades now, before being converted into pasture land. The entire sighting lasted approximately 3 seconds, from him seeing it while driving until fully gone, since the sight was airborne. From his recollection, it was extremely large, stood right next to a tree. He saw eye shine, and the eyes were large, as well with what appeared to be claws on its feet. The creature had long hair or fur all over it. Most of him was covered by something that he said appeared like a cape, or wings even, covering most of its body length. He could not tell if they were webbed, but they were definitely something attached to it, which we may have thought. He is 100% positive he saw this, and is actually very shaken up about it, since he clearly has no explanation for it. His car stopped working immediately after the sighting, so we believe there is some sort of electrical interference occurring at the time. He believes it stood about 7 foot tall, dark in color, wings folded across its back, and extended like a stingray. His car stopped working after it took off into the air at an angle towards the eastern direction, but due to the electrical interference with his radio, which was turned off at the time of the sighting, which is also noted with other Mothman encounters. We were not able to find any evidence of anything, but we both believe he saw something and would like to help finding what he saw. (2008) San Antonio, Texas. A police officer was driving alone on patrol one night when he heard a loud thumping sound coming from the back of his squad car. He stopped, got out to investigate, and then suddenly had an unexpected encounter with a creature that resembled both man and beast. The bizarre encounter left him frightened and shaken. This is what he claims to have experienced. I was on patrol in a new district that I was not familiar with. It was around 2:20 a.m. I had just finished checking several convenience stores when I heard a loud thumping sound coming from the back of my vehicle. I immediately pulled over to investigate. As I got out of the car, something large began to run through the woods across the street towards me from behind. I thought it was a person for a quick second, but as it got closer, I realized it wasn't. And whatever this thing was, it was actually running on all fours. I couldn't believe what I saw. The being was hairy and had the body of a man, but the head of a wolf. It also appeared at first to be in some sort of costume or uniform, but I realized that was just how hairy it was. It stopped moving about 30 feet in front of me and stared me down, sizing me up. I was so frightened I couldn't move. I laid on my car horn for several minutes, hoping somebody would come to my aid, but nobody did. This thing began to charge at me, so I drove off. I didn't feel comfortable sharing this with anybody. Most people wouldn't have believed me or thought I was crazy. But now that so many sightings are being reported all over the world, I decided it was time to share what happened to me and hope that other officers feel comfortable coming forward. 2001, the Navajo Reservation. A mysterious sighting of a humanoid figure which is similar to the famous Mothman. According to this Navajo witness, his name was Jerry Garcia. He had been on duty with his partner when they saw a white human-like standing on top of a mesa rock near Shiprock, New Mexico. The flashing light revealed a skull-shaped head and glowing eyes that were very large. The jaw was covered in long white hairs. The humanoid figure stood 8 feet tall and had a wingspan of almost 12 feet after it ascended into the sky. It took about 3 steps, flapped its wings once, and flew off over the horizon at over 80 miles per hour. So what is this? Is this another Mothman-related sighting, or something different? The Navajo are no doubt one of the most famous tribes in U.S. history. Could their land be home to many unknown terrifying creatures that reside in not just forests, but also remote lands? Please leave your thoughts below this case. Alleged secret government facility in Hawaii being used to train psychic special operations units. 1991. A former employee from an alleged secret government facility in Hawaii has gone on record to describe what has been going on there for years now. A classified unit that deploys psychic warriors trained in remote viewing into other realities and timelines where humans have apparently never existed before. These claims come from William Edgar, an alleged former employee who says he went to the facility in the late 80s to work there. He claims that all military personnel are trained in psychic warfare. They can be deployed into other timelines and universes using clairvoyance and precognition abilities to accomplish their missionary goals. According to this whistleblower, the U.S. government has found a way for classified military units to travel interdimensionally by tricking biophysical bodies into having an out-of-body experience, while leaving their physical body behind. The secret government is doing this in order to harness the power of time and space, by accessing these other universes that exist in what scientists call the same space, but not the same time. When an individual is said to have left their body, they are believed to be in a state known as the biophysical phase. According to conspiracy theory lore, once you leave your physical form behind, you can walk through walls and even fly. You can even travel into different timelines or parallel universes where everything is possible, especially traveling back in a time before human civilization was created on Earth. Mr. Edgar claims that people are being recruited from our top universities all across America. Many students showing great potential for having psychic abilities due to their age. These recruits are put through rigorous training programs to hone in their abilities before being sent on field missions. Edgar was killed shortly after releasing this information from a fatal car accident in 1993. The Hawaiian government and United States government have quickly responded and dismissed all claims as ridiculous and absurd. In 1985. A bad storm had just passed through Burlington County when Officer A.J. Quinn spotted something hovering over Route 130, which runs between Burlington and Bordentown. On June 20th, at approximately 6:40 p.m., I was traveling on Route 563, south of Chatsworth, near the Franklin Parker Reserve Speedwell entrance. I was looking to see what the parking situation there was for future hikes, so my eyes were on the right side of the road when out of the periphery, I saw what I thought was a groundhog on the left. At least, it looked like it. It was very large. I realized it would have had to been huge for one to be like that. So the size I saw was roughly 4 feet tall, standing on 2 legs. It reminded me physically of a groundhog. I did not get a good look at the face, and I almost continued to decide to turn around about 150 yards up on a dirt road to the right. I pulled in, turned around, and headed back to that location. There is a bend in the road there. It bends around to the right, and on the way back, as I made it past the bend, approximately 30 yards in front of me, the creature was still there. It was now fully turned towards me. I could see that it looked like a cross between Curious George and the character Chaka from The Land of the Lost. Its face and hands, as well as the tops of its feet, were hairless and light tan in color. The fur it was covered with was golden brown, a little darker than a golden retriever, very much like the color of a groundhog. I could not see the nose. When I locked eyes with it, I could see just the whites. I stood there for a second or two when I rounded the bend, and then took off past back into the swampy area. It ducked behind a short bush. When I drove past it, I could no longer see it. I turned the car around yet again, and when I went by a second time, it was gone. I waited there a bit to see if I could see anything moving in the field. I couldn't, so I considered it done and took off. It was a couple of days before I shared the experience with my family and friends. In that period of time, I thought for sure somebody was going to report a missing kid in a Halloween costume. When the thing took off running, it was fast. I would describe it as the fastest kid on the 10-12 baseball team. We had really bad storms that night, and my commute was a disaster. It poured all through that area, and I thought it was odd that the thing I saw appeared to be dry. At least its fur was, which would lead me to believe it was under some sort of covering or underground. Of course, there are always skeptics out there suggesting this type of ferocious cryptid is just some innocent child dressed up in a puffy Halloween costume on Hallows Eve. But why would it be out there, of all places? Or maybe Officer A.J. Quinn simply mistook an actual groundhog for something bipedal. Unfortunately, for those skeptics and doubters, A.J. Quinn is a legitimate officer who was on duty at the time of the sighting and has never been known to mislead. Over the years, there have been reports of other sightings in this area of Bordentown, New Jersey, where the creature is said to dwell. Still, others suggest that terrifying entities, as the winged humanoid and red eyes, are merely overactive imaginations that produce nothing more than tall tales and fictitious stories about little green men from Mars, or aggressive Bigfoot-like creatures with pointy ears and glowing eyes. Crazy UFO accounts and outlandish conspiracy theories aside, Officer A.J. Quinn's frightening account of his eyewitness experience in Bordentown, New Jersey, is simply evidence that he and other witnesses did truly see something unusual and terrifying. A police officer was critically injured after being attacked by a large and powerful unknown creature. The attack took place one night in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. a close friend and colleague of the victim, describes what he witnessed that night. I was there with him. We were searching the building for a suspect when all of a sudden, something came rushing out of one of the rooms. It knocked me off my feet when I got back up. He was being attacked by this monster. He was much stronger than anything I have seen. He was able to throw Jeff 10 feet in the air with ease. I pulled out my firearm, firing it several times, but it wouldn't budge an inch. Like the bullets didn't even bother it. I don't know what happened after that. I blacked out for several moments. When I came to, the creature had already disappeared and Jeff was unconscious, badly injured and bleeding, with a head injury and broken ribs. The victim describes how he was seeing his partner pointing his firearm at an unknown creature. Jeff felt his gun jam when he looked up. The unknown being seemed to disappear in front of him. Jeff went to check on his partner and found him not breathing. The victim was able to regain consciousness but quickly collapsed again shortly thereafter. Police officers were immediately dispatched to the scene. They took both men to a nearby hospital for treatment. Both sustained serious injuries and were unable to work for several months during their recovery period. (1980) A Navajo officer says he encountered a white skeletal creature on the Navajo Indian Reservation in Arizona. The officer and 2 others said they encountered the thing one night as they were patrolling the desert near Shiprock. I thought it was a bear or some other kind of animal, said Joe Bailey, now an investigator for the tribe's Division of Public Safety. It looked like something with high cheekbones and deep set-in eyes. It had shorter arms, but its front legs were short. Bailey says he didn't realize it wasn't an animal until he got out of his patrol car to investigate, noticed and heard the footfalls echoing off to either side. He also noticed that there were no tracks. Bailey says the creature was nearly 7 feet. The other 2 witnesses, who requested anonymity, also said the animal was hairless and had carroty red eyes. Bailey said it was the ugliest thing I've ever seen. He added that he felt a sensation akin to pins and needles when he looked at it. It disappeared before reaching a telephone booth. Bailey claims that he contacted Navajo Tribal Police Chief Samuel Pete about his experience after reading newspaper accounts of sightings in northeastern Arizona, right near the Navajo Mountain. This is where others have reported seeing a giant man with white skin that leaves no tracks or scent behind. The report also went on to include a local scientist's theory that the animal was potentially a genetic aberration, resulting from nuclear experiments in nearby Area 51, or quite possibly a descendant of species of bear known to have been in the area thousands of years ago. A few days before Bailey's alleged encounter, 2 other Navajo officers had reported seeing a huge hairless dog that stood up about 5 feet tall. This is in the same vicinity on July 4th. One Leland Joe saw an unidentified 5-foot-tall being with white skin and glowing green eyes running across a field, again leaving no tracks. Also, a retired military man said he saw another creature one night. His car suddenly stopped mid-drive for no apparent reason, suffering from electronic issues. He turned off the ignition, turned on the lights to find that he was surrounded by several of these beings. These beings reportedly had glowing green eyes and fang-like teeth. They surrounded his car. He screamed and they appeared to just disintegrate into the air. As soon as they did, his entire car shot on again, and he was able to successfully drive away. We're not exactly sure what we're dealing with, but there is something definitely supernatural lingering in the state of Arizona. September 1st, 2012. A police officer from the area I live in was patrolling Route 563 2 weeks ago and saw a 7-foot-tall, goblin-like creature standing right next to a tree around 1:45 in the morning. He pulled over and the thing took off running. He chased it for almost a mile before it disappeared into the thin air. It was vomit green color, with short horns on top of its head and large red eyes. That eye shine was activated by car headlights. The officer said that he could see the eyes and they were definitely red. The officer also says that it appeared to have a short tail, very muscular arms and legs, like a runner or a wrestler, and had a very reptilian-like appearance, even though it was most certainly bipedal. There was another officer who had a similar sighting back in 1989. He says that he was traveling at about 2 in the morning, and he saw what he estimated to be a 6-foot-tall, a green reptilian creature standing next to the road. He slowed down to get a closer look at it before running off. I'm not sure what to make of all this, if anything, but I felt compelled to share my story. It could be connected to others out there who've had similar experiences. The area in Franklin Park is not far from Route 563, and it's deep in the woods where nobody really goes anymore, unless they know somebody who lives back there. It didn't surprise me. I've heard several stories over the years about people seeing things like Bigfoots, Sasquatches. Back when I was in high school, I had my own sighting of something like this, so things like that didn't really bother me too much. I consider myself to have thick skin. My friends and I saw 2 hairy black tall figures crossing the road. They were much taller than an average human, only they weren't apes, nor were they completely human either. It was hard to make out exactly what they were due to the moonlight being behind them and shining in our eyes so much we couldn't see the exact detail, but their size was considerable, at minimum 7 feet. Do you have any insight to what these creatures are? Is there more than one? Can you tell me if they are somehow related to the chupacabra or other known cryptids that exist? Thank you for all your work. At approximately 7:04 p.m., Officer Linda Seabrook was driving home from work on the Garden State Parkway when she saw a human-like creature that can only be described as gargoyle-like, having dark reddish skin and scaly reptilian wings. Officer Seabrook stated her disbelief in fact that such things even existed, but remains adamant of what she had seen. Officer Scott Kimball had a sighting of a gargoyle reptilian on Route 33 near Union at approximately 4:35 a.m. Police Officer Scott Kimball was making his usual patrol rounds on Route 33 near the town of Union when he happened to see what could only be described as a gargoyle. The creature stood nearly 6 foot tall, scaly, wings protruding from its back. Its face had the general shape of a human, but with larger than normal eyes and canine teeth. When it landed briefly on top of an abandoned building, Officer Kimball could make out the creature's tail, which was approximately 5 feet in length. Police dispatch receives calls of gargoyle sighting in Cherry Hill Township at also approximately 8:43. Dispatch received multiple calls coming into their office reporting something that looked like a gargoyle atop one of the buildings located along Haddonfield Road. According to the witnesses, they too described a creature standing nearly 7 feet tall with wings that were large and bat-like behind the shoulders. The wingspan itself was estimated to be around 13 feet across. Other witnesses have sightings of reptilian humanoids in the Pennsauken Township at approximately 3:17 a.m. Multiple witnesses called into the PD to report what they can only be described as a strange flying reptilian creature. They said it had red glowing eyes, large wings, and massive black talons. 2010, right around 5:30 a.m., Officer Blacksmith received a call about a hulking figure seen lurking about near the intersection of US 2 and 41. He arrived at the scene to discover that a female motorist had witnessed the creature crossing in front of her vehicle as she traveled along US 2 into town. Additionally, Officer Blacksmith talked with 2 hunters who had also seen the same creature. The first hunter stated that he was nearly run off the road by it, while the other told him directly that he had encountered it firsthand. The witnesses are all experienced hunters familiar with what they should be seeing out there in order to safely navigate their way through these woods, all during deer season. One witness specifically said that he has never seen anything like this before, but it definitely was not human. It was massive. It was black or really dark brown. I could not tell what direction it was headed. It all happened so fast. Officer Blacksmith described the area near where he made contact with the witness as being very wet and overgrown, lots of thick underbrush. He also said that it's known to be an area where hunters have complained about encountering strange phenomena while out in the woods during hunting season. Blacksmith stated that normally when he receives calls like this, they come from local townspeople who are also unfamiliar with the territory, making them easily identifiable when spotted by officers on patrol. Blacksmith went on to state that these two specific eyewitnesses were definitely not locals. Having spent most of their lives living in part of the Upper Peninsula, he said that his well over a decade of patrolling the area, he's never had to respond to something like this before, although it's no doubt harvested his interest in researching and hunting these reported creatures. 1999. Reports of a large bipedal canine resembling a hyena have been reported around Grand Rapids in the lower peninsula of Michigan. Officer Blackburn reports his incident. February 2nd, 1999. I responded to a call for an unidentified animal spotted on King Highway near Riesland Drive in Comstock Park, since we serve the entire county. The witnesses said that they were driving when they saw something run across the road and into some nearby woods. They described it as about 6 feet tall, black fur, and a long tail that was moving quickly. Its movements were very fluid and similar to that of a kangaroo. They kept expecting to see it jump over a ditch, but it never did. The one thing they were sure of was that it ran on 2 legs. I went into the wooded area, immediately began seeing tracks in the snow. I followed them for about 15 minutes, until I lost them at a steep embankment. There was no way anyone could scale that bank, with feet like those, about 20 inches long. Massive canine feet, without using their hands too. It should be noted that these sounds are heard during daylight hours only, and thus far, there has been no sighting of what would be construed as Bigfoot during darkness, which is considered very unusual, if indeed this creature exists, as most Bigfoot sightings occur at night or dusk and dawn conditions. Witnesses have been exclusively rural residents. They claim to have been hunting, hiking, etc., when they heard the sounds and then spotted a large bipedal canine figure in their vicinity. It really makes you wonder. An unknown bipedal canine was reported being sighted by a police officer just west of Highway 164 in Richfield, Wisconsin. On July 18th, 2021, 8:30 p.m., a police officer who will remain anonymous was driving eastbound on Pleasant Hill Road, roughly 1.5 miles west of Highway 164 in Richfield. He caught something moving just off the side of the road. He slowed down to have a look and got out for a better look, as well as shining his flashlight over in the darkness. His attention turned towards something in the trees, and he saw 2 large eyes staring back at him, which were apparently high up. It took him several seconds to find their source, supposedly what looked like legs. It was standing there, completely motionless. At least that's how it appeared to him, and was reflecting light from its eyes. The officer describes the figure as being very tall, well over 7 feet, covered in very fine hair, having long arms and 2 legs that were proportionally large. It was upright, like a person, hocks in the legs like a dog. The officer claims there is no sound at all, just complete silence from this thing and outside. After observing it for several seconds, he gets back in his car, drives off. He's 100% sure that is what he saw. It was not a bear or anything like that. He has seen bear hunting on his off time multiple times. This was far more canine-like in appearance. The area near where the sighting took place is reportedly known for unexplained sounds and apparently screams coming from the forest. Think like strange cries. The officer has also seen strange things before while patrolling the same area. Footprints, sounds, sightings. Now, I myself have a very good friend who has also reported seeing two large-legged figures covered in fur right around this same location. These figures were standing right next to a tree on the south side of the road, close to the shoulder. The road in this area is curvy. He also said he caught eye shine, and the eyes were very large. We said he probably saw this for about 3 seconds. His headlights caught this, and he is 100% positive he saw something. He said his heart dropped and he immediately called me while still driving. I knew something unique based on his demeanor and tone had happened. About 45 minutes after he had called me, I went back to the site with him. We brought our dog. Every time we stopped or approached this area where the sighting was, he started to whimper, and the dog would not let us get any closer. As we were getting close and in a place where we could actually pull off and stop, something very loud happened behind us that startled both of us. A loud growl. I swear, it came from one spot, right next to the road, then moved into these trees where it sounded like at least two animals fighting for 5 seconds. That's what my friend said. It made me start talking. Then, his question got cut off by another sound. This disturbance causing our dog to start whining and whimpering would not go any further. We stood there for a good while listening to the woods, but did not proceed further. The area where we parked is very secluded. Nobody was out there. It was like 10 p.m. We knew what we heard. We knew it was not a bear or any other large animal that is known, because of how it sounded. Its proximity to the road, and the fact you could pinpoint its location. It also was moving in a way that made us think a person. This creature seemed aggressive because of what just happened. We then decided to back off into top speed on our vehicle, so we would get out of the area quickly, should other disturbances happen, which still caused me to call my friend while driving stupidly fast down this road. The noises stopped, so I felt better. Thank you for your time to read this. I know it was long, but I just want to make sure you had all the information you needed. I'm going to remain anonymous for this, but I had a sighting of something that I can't explain in 2011, springtime. And during the time, I was working as a police officer for a small town in northwestern Oklahoma. What made me take an interest in this particular case was the description given to me by the witness. It sounded just like how other witnesses have described other abnormals, to include Sasquatch. I had one individual come to the department as they were reporting what they thought they saw appeared to be a man with long black hair, no shirt or clothes, standing near their pond at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Apparently, it looked like they were holding a knife or some sort of weapon. As he noticed them looking out their window, he began walking into the woodline, disappearing from view nonetheless, never returning, only after several attempts of trying to find him by the reporting party. I'm not sure what he had actually had in his hand. I never asked of a description of it specifically, but I began to do some research on my own. I came across several websites dedicated to Bigfoot sightings, where individuals could almost describe perfectly, with many others, what they had seen. In my years as an officer, before retiring from law enforcement, I've come across multiple reports of unusual creatures being seen all throughout Oklahoma, as well as neighboring states. In fact, just last year alone, I had another retired law enforcement officer tell me all about an experience that their own individual mother-in-law had while she lived out on a farm near Elk City. She told him about a time she had gone out to her chicken coop and had a face-to-face encounter with a small monkey-type animal, standing on 2 feet without hair, looked like it was wearing pants, who began making loud sounds before running away. It appeared as if it had jumped over multiple fences, only to disappear into the tree line. I also know that many people have reported seeing humanoid creatures looking similar to how Bigfoot looked and how Bigfoot is described, all through various areas all around Elk City, Shawnee as well, and even the town I grew up in, Guthrie, where witnesses and victims claim these creatures prey on livestock, chickens, goats, pigs, everything. This is also not the only time I've received reports involving unusual creatures, that match what has been described by the witness to include Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I'm sure these things happen all the time throughout the US, and even other countries throughout the world. However, I'm most familiar with Oklahoma, and it appears to be designated for many areas of things like this. I really doubt a lot of these stories are made up. If you got a chance to sit down and talk to these witnesses, they're terrified. Something is happening here. What could these creatures be? How does somebody prove their existence without anyone ever actually catching one? Do they really exist in different forms? January of 2001. Officer Bradwick encountered what he described as a tall being reminding him of Nosferatu. It terrified him. His story is one of the scariest reports on record. This story has remained unsolved to this day, and has had more eyes on it than anything I've ever written about yet. He saw something, and I could tell you fairly certainly that whatever it was could not just be simply explained away. I was driving down the road in Franklin County, Texas. It was around 2:30 in the morning. I had just passed under a streetlight. It was very dim, but I could see everything outside of its illumination. I was looking up at some movement on the right side of the road. There were cow paths through this area, and it looked like something large had ran across my path. I slowed down to about 45 miles per hour, thinking I would let whatever it was pass me if I wanted to cross here. Now, as soon as I did this, what appeared to be a man traveling on all fours jumped up from off the ground, flying and leaping over my car. The being that Bradwick saw was well over 8 feet tall, pale white, and had a sickly-looking face and skin. Long claws, eyes that were yellow and green, a very pronounced face, sharp features, bald, sharp pointy ears, and whitish, deathly bluish skin. Which is why he made the Nosferatu reference. He said it also kind of reminded him of a vampire bat in the face. Could this be some sort of ancient creature, like a vampire or a demon? Is it out here eating cows? Or perhaps this is the mysterious chupacabra, responsible for draining the blood out of many livestock animals? What do you think? August of 2000. Detective Jason Schaefer says he saw an 8 to 9 foot tall, upright figure at about 1:53 a.m. He was in pursuit of 3 suspicious men in a vehicle. The entity in question was standing in the middle of the road, blocking his way. The detective slammed on his brakes, but got out of the car to make sure that he was not hallucinating. The creature ran, probably about 40 to 50 miles an hour, clearing the highway in 2 leaps. For more than half an hour after this experience, Schaefer's hands shook uncontrollably, to such an extent he could not even hold a cup of coffee. He has not returned to that location since his encounter. It's been speculated that this entity is a form of Bigfoot, but since no other sightings have been reported at the time, I cannot conclude that with any certainty. However, I have heard several stories of what is being called shadow people all throughout the Atlanta area. This leads me to believe that the general population are not coming forward with their own sightings, for fear of ridicule, humiliation, while some do not even know that these entities exist. I'm sure there are many more people out there who have had encounters or experienced paranormal phenomena. They just don't realize it. They've never had any prior knowledge of them. This is why I'm sharing his story. Please feel free to share this experience with your friends and family. But remember, keep an open mind. Thank you for taking the time to read about Mr. Schaefer's experience. 8:03 a.m. Officer was dispatched to a disturbance in the downtown area. Upon arrival, was flagged down by a college student who had been walking back to a friend's house. The student stated that she had been walking down the street and heard weird cat-type noises, as if there were 2 large cats fighting around the corner of the apartment building. As she got closer, it sounded as though the fight was moving away from her at a much faster speed. The officer made his way towards the direction that was being described and found nothing upon arriving at said location. Officer then began driving through the neighborhood, hearing no further reports, stopping at one point to observe some kids playing basketball. While stopped and idling, however, he heard and saw what can only be described as a very large, very dark, bipedal animal darting behind one of the buildings. The officer immediately turned around to investigate, found nothing upon arrival at said location. Note: this has been cross-referenced with a police report from earlier this year, detailing a similar occurrence in January, involving an unknown creature standing on two legs and looking in through an apartment window before disappearing behind the building that it was seen beside. The woman involved in that case stated she had seen previous issues with her cat going missing. This is after behaving strangely for several days on end, preceding each disappearance and death, since this is not the first cat to have happened to. These two cases could not be related, as no direct correlation could be made between either person's statement or their prior history with any type of animal life. The officer found nothing upon arriving at said location. However, the second sighting occurred within 60 days. As such, it does indeed constitute a second sighting. The animal was characterized by being bipedal, dark in color, with two glowing yellow eyes, which also were described as feline. No further information is exactly available at this time. No correlation between the sightings have been established. A search of the area involved turned up no signs of any animals matching either officer's description. No correlating reports have been made from neighboring precincts. However, further investigation into any possible link with that case from January is currently ongoing. I'll keep looking for anything else that might be related to this one, but right now, everything points toward a dead end on this one too. June 22nd, 2013. Officer Jameson spotted what he describes as a dogman in the middle of a dirt road, standing on its hind legs, looking directly at the officer. This is an interesting case, due to being so close to where I live. The creature, I believe, has been seen many times by locals since 1995, when Officer Jameson had run into this one. I've talked with several people that have seen it, including two that saw the creature at different times, 10 months apart. Both people I've talked to had told me they too had seen a dogman in the area of Kempner. This is in Texas/Cotton, Oklahoma. The area is located just off of US 75 between Crum and Sanger. From talking with several people who live in that area, including a former police officer, the creature had been seen many times all throughout the years. The first time I heard about this creature was from a gentleman who was a local government official of one of the nearby towns. He wishes to remain anonymous. He stated that he had family members who live in Kempner. They had told him of their encounters with the dogman, as well as seeing it chasing several deer on multiple occasions. A little bit more investigating led me to Officer Jameson and his sighting of the strange creature back in '95, as well as recent cell phone pictures taken by an Oklahoma construction worker, detailing and showing an animal standing upright like a man near the I-35 between Durant and Gainesville, heading into Texas. Officer Jameson's encounter with what we believe may be the very same creature prompted me to contact and reach other officials who deal with cryptozoology. We all agree that this may be a dogman, and is possibly related to the two sightings of a strange animal that had been eating livestock in southern Oklahoma, near Lawton, by ranchers going back many decades. We believe it may even be responsible for killing and eating two calves in northern Fannin County back in 2011, as well as a horse being killed and partially eaten in Cole County, near Bromede, in 2013. This is after a sighting by a school bus driver on Highway 69, east of Tishomingo, who also saw tracks nearby. After speaking with several locals about the recent encounters, including one family who had also held several possible Sasquatch encounters near their home, my partner and I will be heading up to study the area and search for possible denning sites. Wish me luck. 2001. Officer N writes this. In late 2001, I was patrolling in a mountainous rural area near Las Vegas, New Mexico. My unit, A fully marked police cruiser was parked on the south side of the road next to some darker woods, while my partner and I sat inside talking while he filled out paperwork. It was about 5 a.m., just getting daylight enough for us to see clearly through the windows without our headlights on. Suddenly, we both noted movement at the edge of the bushes right along where there would be no path or roadway. Something very large began lumbering across the open ground towards us. As it got closer, we could tell it had 4 legs with hooves, but what really caught our attention were its arms. Long muscular forearms swinging back and forth like an ape. The animal covered about 100 yards in the time it took the headlights to circle through the windshield, since we were still sitting idle. And when it cleared the headlights, we could tell it was very, very large, at least 8 feet tall. We both jumped out of the car, with my partner behind me, reaching for his gun while I went towards its direction without drawing my weapon. The animal apparently realized this, taking off into the woods on all fours. However, when I entered into these same woods, attempting to follow it, there was no sign of any tracking or disturbance in the thick brush. This would suggest that somebody had ran through there. I talked to the other officers in neighboring towns who later told me they'd also see reports of a wild man in the area. There were other reports from the same period where horses had been talked about being spooked and large human-like footprints being found alongside of them. Our department has spent about an hour tracking it to no avail, and we never saw it again. (1969) Officer Miller is reported to have encountered a being in the New London County on 2 separate occasions while patrolling. The first incident took place around midnight, and he saw the creature only 15 feet away from his parked cruiser. It was large, covered with short, dark hair, had no clothes or jewelry on of any kind, and these large gray eyes that glowed similar to the way a flashlight does. The second sighting occurred several months later, after Officer Miller received information about an unrelated incident involving 3 missing people who were hunting in the area while where he sighted the creature once before. Officer Miller stated that they went out to investigate, setting up some traps for it. They did not find anything, though, due to the heavy rainfall. He claims it was around 5 weeks later, while off duty at home, the telephone rang. It was the deputy sheriff in charge of investigating the missing people, who wanted to know if he had seen anything unusual. Officer Miller said that due to the heavy rainfall, there was no way for it to leave evidence, but told him what he had saw 5 weeks prior. The officer described the creature as being around 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in short dark hair, and a very ugly face. The eyes were also said to be glowing this weird gray faint color. During the summer of 1973, Detective Bradson was called to investigate a complaint about an unknown animal killing livestock. It was first thought to be a wolf or coyote, but that notion was quickly dismissed. While walking through the woods, he came upon what appeared to be large tracks. Followed them as they led into a swamp area with very heavy and thick vegetation. He stated that once he had entered the area, it felt like somebody was watching him, and he had noticed a pair of bright green eyes in the distance. Detective Bradson pulled out his gun, firing a warning shot into the air, but the eyes soon disappeared. He stated that he left when it began to get dark, thinking that whatever that was watching him. It would not bother him if he turned his back on it, so he decided to leave. Bradson described the same creature that was in Miller's report, only 4 years prior to this happening. New Orleans, 2005. There had been a call about an individual that had possibly broken into the home of an elderly person who was now deceased. After further investigation into the case, another call came in standing. There was 2 suspicious individuals prowling around the property of a boarded-up house near the swamps. The officers responded and found what they described as 2 men wearing black suits, which stood about 6 feet. They were standing in the shadows when they approached. The police officers both made the decision to shoot at them, but somehow these individuals vanished into thin air. There were no signs of any footprints or how they escaped. There had been nothing that could have provided them a bridge for their escape. No cover or anything nearby that would have allowed them. The area had been searched thoroughly and could not find a single trace of the two men that were described. The second sighting took place just weeks later, when another individual who was out late claimed that he had been abducted by an unknown creature. They believe it may have been the same two men as before that they described, creatures being very tall and very pale, with no hair, the face appearing to be more skull-like, but there were still enough features present that they could see it was very human-like. The witness said that it tried to talk to them, but their vocal cords were not made for speaking the language that they heard. They had no clue what language they were speaking, but it was something very different about these creatures than most people would expect to ever find out in the swamps of New Orleans. New Orleans PD officer Mike Farrell stated to the media that he had been able to find any information online about these creatures. It would be unlikely for people to believe their story if they did not see it for themselves. He said that there have also been other sightings in the area, but nothing else substantial as to what was reported by his own partners. There were no traces of blood or any other kind of medical equipment, anything that would have been used to transport the body from the scene where they found it. Their reports seemed to indicate that somebody had just dropped an elderly woman on the front lawn and left her body. Now, the latest story had been relayed by a man who was a senior officer at the New Orleans PD. He was an off-duty cop, but had stopped into a local bar to grab something to eat and drink before heading home. While eating, he saw another officer walk in, looking rather disturbed about something that had happened on the shift. The senior officer asked him if everything was all right. He responded by saying they had been sent to do a welfare check on an elderly woman. When they arrived, nobody was at the location. The house did not appear to have been entered, so they went back to check on the vehicle, continue with surveillance on the property. They noticed a light on in the window, which made them decide to rush into the house. But again, there were no signs somehow of electricity even being turned on or connected, which doesn't make any sense. They checked the entire place, didn't find anyone or anything, so they went back out to resume surveillance. While standing by the front door, an officer said he saw movement in his peripheral. It startled him. He looked into the shadows that were cast by the trees, and he saw movement, which made him believe that something was coming towards them. A second officer stepped closer to see what he was looking at, and both of them realized they were staring at two figures walking up to the house. The first one they described as being very tall, walking with very long strides. The other was quite small in comparison. They are not sure if it was a child or someone shorter than average height. The officers that night decided not to pursue these figures. I think it was a combination of being a little too spooked, and the fact that these figures evaded them by disappearing into the shadows. One of the accompanying officers on the scene also reported a strange electrical feeling in the air, but wasn't sure if that had anything to do with any of these strange occurrences around the elderly woman missing, or the fact that she had no electricity running to her house, yet there were still lights on in the room. All very strange things that cannot be explained. In this report, the officer wishes to remain completely anonymous, but had a sighting of a strange humanoid werewolf-looking creature while patrolling a rural section of Baxter County, Arkansas. The creature had been spotted on a four-way stop by another officer, and as such, the first-handed officer was sent to investigate. When he arrived at the location, the strange-looking humanoid made its appearance, beginning to walk across one of the roads into some nearby brush. As it turns out, this area is part of a long history that includes werewolf-type activity, as well as strange, unexplainable animal deaths and disappearances. There was no time to see how big this creature was. It very quickly disappeared into a nearby wooded area. The officer did make a search of the location and discovered several sets of tracks in the dirt roads. But because it had rained recently, there were not enough for a clear picture of what might have been responsible. The report went on to state, while this particular section does not get its share of strange activity, including other types of animal mutilations and sightings by local residents, this is the only official complaint from an officer thus far. Other officers from the same department have also come forward to discuss their knowledge of the area, including one who claimed that his own grandfather had told him about a werewolf-type creature living around here. Because his location was so remote, few people ever went there. There were no other reports until now. Since then, there have been a string of stories from around the world on some very strange and disturbing creatures, including a few, like on sites like Reddit, where people have also claimed to see werewolf-type creatures. Although this is nothing new, as there have been reports of these beings seen back for centuries here in America. There was one interesting note that made this one stand out among all others. That was an incident involving a mother and child who saw what they thought was a Bigfoot moving along near their home just outside of town. They got into position with their camera and began recording. What happened next is something that those who have seen werewolves before will only find too familiar. The description given sounds like it could be a dog or a wolf that is suffering from mange possibly, which causes hair loss and other physical ailments. However, there's one important note here, and it has to do with the apparent bad smell that was given off by this sickly-looking animal. That's right. Dogmen, Bigfoots, werewolves, they've all been reported in association with some very bad odors, and this particular sighting seems more than likely when you consider its location. There have been reports of similar sightings around these parts, so people do live in here and are aware of what they might be seeing. Yet another report involved two separate officers, each having their own stories to tell about the incidents they've had while patrolling this particular part of Arkansas. With most of these reports occurred during the night, although there is very little known about these encounters. Most people who have seen them describe them as being around 5 to 6 feet tall, looking very gaunt and thin. There's also a mention of glowing eyes, which, if you read many reports, seems to be a common link among all these types. One officer stated that he had been out in the same area, and he saw something moving quickly through the trees. At first, he thought it might be an animal, but then another report came over his radio about a Bigfoot sighting nearby, so this was close enough to make him feel uneasy about what he might actually have seen. And yet another report. A Cessna pilot was flying his small plane at about 5 a.m. He came upon what looked like a huge hairy creature that had also been spotted by several other pilots in this rural region of Arkansas. This particular officer stated that people who live in these areas have been telling stories for years now about how they've encountered these strange creatures, and even some said they knew of some who hunt them. Out of the most interesting encounters I found, this one involved a police officer from the Calhoun County who responded to an animal complaint one evening near the town of DeQuincy. As he arrived on scene, he saw two sets of eyes coming up from behind a nearby tree, which he described as being extremely bright. This was the first sighting of what he thought was a huge canine-type creature, but then it opened its mouth and let out this unearthly growl, causing him to back up in fear. The officer who saw this said that whatever it was, it must have been 8 feet tall, grayish-dark smoky fur all over its body. And lastly, the final sighting occurred on Highway 165 near Wilmer, where another cop had responded to a call about kids who claimed they'd seen a Bigfoot or werewolf type of person. According to their description, this thing had very long arms, raccoon or human-like hands, and it was enough to scare the officer away from the sighting. On the evening of July 7th, 2007, police officer Jim Corder was patrolling an area of the swamp in Lauderdale County, Mississippi. He noticed two red dots reflecting in his headlights. The object turned out to be an animal which appeared similar to that of an alligator, but had legs and arms with thumbs on each hand. According to reports, it walked upright like a human being, or like a man. The sighting lasted for about 20 seconds, before the creature quickly moved off into the darkness under the tree canopy. Officer Corder stated that there were no houses in the immediate vicinity, and that this was not far from one of several alligators were spotted earlier in the week. He said that there's no way it could have been mistaken for any other type of animal. Corder immediately reported the incident to his supervisor, who was completely surprised by what he had said. A chopper with thermal imaging devices was requested after daybreak, but nothing could be found or the following morning. It's speculated that this creature was the lizard man, also in part of the Mothman legend. Supposedly, One of the first lizardman sightings came from an oil rig worker who saw it crossing nearby in Scarberry, West Virginia in December. Local residents claim there are caves along the swamps where bodies were taken to be experimented on during World War II, all done by Japanese scientists who were brought here for the purpose under Operation Paperclip. Some believe these experiments created what are now called lizardmen, but keep in mind it's all speculation. Of course, there's other infamous cases, like the 1980s lizardman of Scape or Swamp in South Carolina, detailing a young man who stopped on the side of the road to deal something with his car, when out of the swamp came a large humanoid lizard that chased him. Yet there was another encounter. A man claimed he was hunting in the swamp, and he saw something that looked like what he described as a 7-foot-tall lizard walking out into the swamp, turning to look at him before wading off into the water. This is a not-so-popular account, and easily is overshadowed by the young man's, although this hunter's account came roughly 3 years after the boy's did. He claims it had scales, bright green eyes, and was only about 30 feet away from him. When shown the drawing of the young boy from the Scape or Swamp situation in 1984, he said it looked identical. Another local resident who claims to have seen this creature states, "I don't know what I saw, but whatever it wasn't human, and it has scared me so bad. I'm still afraid to go back out there alone." Sightings of similar creatures have been reported in many of the areas around the world: Central and South America, Africa, Australia, Japan, and China. In most cases where witnesses have been able to give detailed descriptions, it's been closely related to a bipedal reptile with scales. Even Native Americans have told their stories about these creatures. They speak of a giant lizard-like monster that hunts and eats humans, especially human children. Some cultures held lizardmen as gods, while others believed them to be man-eaters and more like animals than men, while others believed them to be demonic deities. Lauderdale County Sheriff Billy Soley states, "We're not saying this thing doesn't exist. We just haven't come up with any evidence yet to prove it. Those who live in or near this area claim they will continue looking until they find some evidence." In conclusion of this report, I would like to state that there are many other first-hand reports of witness sightings, experiences, and encounters. These should not be taken lightly, as they could very well cause panic if released to the wrong people or put into the wrong hands. If you have any more information detailing this creature, or know anybody who has had an encounter with it, please contact me by email. There is several sightings reported all around Sedgwick County, all by different law enforcement officials. Sightings are rare, but they do happen. The day of October 17th, 2010, yet another officer working out of Sedgwick County had his very own sighting. He was on patrol in the backwoods of the Wichita area, and he saw something that will never leave him. An unknown, large, horned humanoid was seen by this officer, and it is hard to believe what he wrote in the report of what really happened. At approximately 7 a.m., I was dispatched to an abandoned residence for a suspicion person call. I arrived at the location, did not see anybody or anything suspicious around the house, so I ran tracks north into some nearby woods along with Sergeant. As we were tracking, I believed and I saw something along the east hilltop through the brush. I could not tell what it was, but I thought it was a person hunched over, moving northbound behind some covering. I alerted Sergeant A to be on the lookout for whatever it was that I had seen. Sergeant A caught up to where I was at, asked me, "What did you see?" As he approached, both of us clearly heard very heavy footsteps coming from our 10 o'clock position. We saw nothing, so we proceeded west towards our vehicle, where we would have had better lighting to investigate the area, because whatever this thing or person was, they were being extremely cautious in their movement. Both Sergeant and I saw what appeared to be an extremely tall, 6-foot grayish or possibly brown-colored subject, standing upright but hunched over. As this being noticed our presence, it turned to its left side, as if it was attempting to conceal itself with some tree coverage. Sergeant A asked me if I had seen the same thing that he just saw. We both then observed what happened to be a large set of horns pointing up from around its head area, very reminiscent to a goat or ram. What we saw next froze us in our tracks. This being lifted up its right arm over its head, which allowed us to see that it had a huge hand with large black claws. It resembled a paw, but much more like that of a hand. There are no reports that match this particular sighting, but the area has a plethora of Bigfoot sightings reported by other officers, and yet another sighting report by a deputy sheriff. He was called by a citizen reporting Bigfoot activity in the area. The deputy sheriff met the witness at the location where the sighting had taken place. The deputy describes what he saw. As he started to investigate the area, my partner and I clearly saw something standing about 200 yards away from us. It did not appear human. We could only see its head and shoulders, as it appeared to be looking into a ravine, or possibly at something coming up out of the ravine. What I remember seeing are two very bright eyes above some vegetation. My partner stated, "It's Bigfoot." We both took off toward an open field nearby, trying to cut it off before it got back over the hillside close to Highway 54, but we lost sight of it. My partner went up to the spot where we had seen it, staying back near the ravine, thinking that Bigfoot was still standing at the bottom of our viewing area. My partner stated, "I don't see anything." We both began to walk toward each other, and as we did, we noticed a very large grayish-colored subject looking above us from an embankment. It seemed to be watching us, as if curious about what we were doing. The creature then ran down into a heavily wooded area, on top of a hillside which would have put it close to the highway again, even though my partner and I were fairly deep into this open field, with no trees or other obstacles between us and it. My partner and I both got a clear look at it running away from us. It did not stand up and walk like a human does, but it did appear to be on two legs, although its speed was very incredible for something large. I have been in law enforcement for over 22 years now, and I've never had anything come close to happening like this did. Other than evidence left behind, we did not get any pictures or videos of the creature, but my partner, I think, got some footage while we were chasing what we thought was going to be a Bigfoot back into the wooded area after having lost sight of it earlier when we first ran through the brush trying to cut it off before it got past us. Unfortunately, he lost access to that camera, taken by his supervisors. My partner and I both felt that the creature knew which direction we would go to cut it off, so by going in opposite directions, it caused us to split up, allowing it time to get away from us. During this encounter, I was wearing my uniform but not my body armor or equipment belt, which can be limiting at times, especially when trying to chase someone or something heavily through the brush. I have read the sighting report filed by Officer B, which also reported a large upright grayish-colored subject only about 20 feet away from him at around 8:25 in the morning near Highway 54 just outside of Sedgwick County, Kansas on December 5th, 2011. This is also right around the same time, approximately, that myself and my partner were chasing a very large unknown subject through the field. My partner and I both heard something walking through the tall grass around us, moving in another direction. It sounded far too heavy to be a human. We did not hear it running, but we did get a clear view of it, approximately 150 yards away from us, looking down. That's a day I'll never forget. This report details an unusual and frightening nighttime encounter with a large canine creature during an overnight patrol shift by two Dallas County Sheriff's Office police deputies. The report states that the officers, parking on the shoulder of 135 southbound, underneath Interstate 35, between mile markers 142 and 141, near West Des Moines, Iowa, at around 2:30 a.m., as they observed northbound traffic, a very large and unidentified canine creature emerged from some nearby cornfields, headed towards their vehicle. The first deputy stated that it ran across the road in front of them very, very quickly. He estimated that it was about 30 yards away before disappearing into the black. The animal made no sound as it approached, or when it crossed the highway. He said that not only was its gait unlike a dog, but it was very large and covered a wider distance with each stride. Further, its light tan coloring blended in with the gravel road. The deputy also stated he noticed some unusual features, such as very long hair, like a horse's mane, down the middle of its back. He considered this to be abnormal for a canine creature, as all the other dogs have seen short hair on their backs. The second deputy said that she first saw the animal at about 45 degrees from her right window as it crossed directly in front of them, without ever slowing down or deviating from its straight path. She estimated that it ran at least 30 feet before becoming obscured by darkness as it entered a cornfield alongside the interstate. She also said that she noticed long hair from its back as well. The first deputy stated that the animal's gait was not normal for a canine, as it traveled much wider than a man with each stride, and that during the few moments before it entered the field of corn, he could not make out any discernible features, but did notice an odd coloration which matched the ground. He added that this creature was like a bipedal German shepherd, but very, very large. Both officers were able to observe this creature for only a few short seconds before it disappeared ultimately into the darkness, and they described a very moonlit night with pretty good visibility. The very first deputy felt he had seen something unusual, but both officers decided to maintain radio silence about their sighting, out of concern they would be perceived as crazy. Afterwards, the first deputy immediately asked to do a search on Google Earth for any Iowa landowner who may have used horses in an unusual manner, which can indicate a possible connection with this canine. He said he quickly located what appeared to be a horse stable surrounded by cornfields nearby, discovered it belonged to a man who was originally from Arizona and had experience with such animals like mountain lions, bears, and even skinwalkers apparently. The deputy decided to make further inquiries to this lead. However, he did not want to risk being seen as suspicious or appear as if this primary purpose was for getting information related to the sighting. The owner of the property declined an interview. The Des Moines County Sheriff's Office, Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and a senior biologist from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources was unable to identify any native species which matched this officer's description. A Texas veterinarian who specializes in examining hair samples was consulted, but stated that she would need a blood sample or tissue sample for proper analysis. The first deputy obtained some hair, found on the shoulder of 135 southbound. However, it was disposed of after being improperly preserved due to procedural error. A second attempt at obtaining a sample from that area, although another source proved unsuccessful as well. In August of 2010, I had my very own sighting of something similar while working third shift patrol with another deputy for Dallas County Precinct 3, Constable's office near Forney, Texas. I was stopped at the intersection of County Road 298 and Stellbridge Road, facing eastbound on CR 298, with my emergency lights activated. I observed something unusual traveling northbound off to my left, or north, in a small wooded area. At first, it looked like it might be a large armadillo or some other form of rodent that had crawled into the brush for shelter. But this thing was moving very fast, and it was moving through thick undergrowth. It didn't seem too large at first, but it certainly kept its distance across the drainage ditch as it continued northbound towards me at about 15 miles an hour, zigzagging back and forth between trees, sometimes losing ground. As it got closer, I noticed that this creature, too, had a long mane and shaggy hair, reminding me of a horse, but the motion was different. The most unusual thing I observed about this animal is that it seemed almost alien and robotic in its movements, walking upright on two legs but with very long strides, like how somebody would run through tall grass while pretending to be Tarzan or something. As it approached my location, about 65 feet away, I got out of my vehicle, and I could hear some dogs barking in the distance at what seemed like the same time when this thing emerged from the trees on the other side of CR 298. After observing me, this thing turned around, running back into the brush where it had disappeared, with an expression on its face like, "Uh-oh, I didn't mean to be caught." As far as size, I would estimate it to be roughly 5 feet tall, but very slender, covered with thick hair. I remained on the scene for about 15 minutes afterwards, thinking the same thing might exit the brush on the other side, but it never did. I felt if there were any aggressive thoughts in its mind towards me, simply because I was a stranger, it could have easily taken me down, since we were only separated by a ditch and several trees. Witnesses who live in that area report that they frequently see stray dogs and feral hogs near their homes. People dump unwanted pets into those woods all the time, but nobody seems to know what this thing actually is. Maybe all those pets make for a food source of whatever that is. Now, a third deputy had also reported seeing tracks, which he believed to be from the same creature at a very similar location. After several weeks, though, of attempting to relocate the tracks, they were lost. I find it strange that this is not more widely known about, since I've been told by state and local authorities numerous people have reported seeing something very similar over the years in that area. A few others claim to have heard extremely loud screams, which sound like a woman being murdered, coming from deep in those same woods. Since there's never been any evidence found of violent deaths or missing persons who match the description, official explanations for these events usually range from wild dogs and coyotes to escaped exotic pets, such as monkeys and lions. However, some locals believe it could be an undiscovered species that we know nothing about, such as a Sasquatch or an undocumented breed of primate. The only clue we have ever found was a single set of prints, which were discovered to be from a man's work boot, maybe accidentally dropped during his normal duties. Perhaps there really is something out there, and it could be right under our noses. This report details the sighting made by a police officer to an apparent bipedal canid in a suburban township of a large city along the Navajo. The original sighting came from two boys who were riding their bicycles. They spotted what they thought was a man walking with a dog, but upon closer inspection, they realized it was not a man. It wasn't very long after this that an officer also reported seeing something very similar during his own patrol shift. It had been raining for some time, so there was plenty of mud to have casted footprints, and possibly even made impressions upon leading up to the officer's first encounter. The police officer first noticed some sort of unusual activity at around 7:30 p.m. on May 23, 2011. It was very shortly after this, he got out of his vehicle to investigate, leaving the engine running, in case he needed to make a quick getaway. The officer had seen something large beneath some trees on the other side of a wire fence that had been knocked down beneath power lines. As it looked up at him, he saw what appeared to be a canine, but standing on 2 legs instead of 4. The creature did not stay around for too long. There's no more information about its exact size or weight available. It was described as being at least 6 feet tall, reddish-brown fur all over its body, which could be interpreted by some people as being fur-like. Whatever this creature was, it sure knew how to quickly escape from the officer, as there's no clear information on its speed or general mannerisms. The boys immediately had called their father, described what they had seen as a tall man. The sighting drew a lot of attention to the area, and soon, other people began reporting seeing similar creatures. In fact, a Navajo tribal officer also witnessed what he would call a skinwalker, reported it to be at least 6 to 7 feet tall and walking around the same neighborhood, although that was a separate incident altogether, and occurred right after some time after the boys' own sighting. This report included a statement by a third witness, who claimed the creature may have been used for some sort of camouflage or stealth, while hiding in some trees or brush about 50 feet away. Shortly before seeing the officer, this man said he had heard dogs barking and howling in a terrible way. This bipedal canine was also described as being covered in dark hair that was more reddish-brown. This eyewitness account came from an 18-year-old Navajo male who claimed to have also seen the creature on May 24, 2011, right around 12:30 a.m. near his home. It is unknown whether or not all 3 witnesses were together during any part of their sighting. but it seems likely due to the creature's size being so similar. The police officer's sighting happened within less than a mile away from where these two others had saw this. Thanks to Lyle Blackburn for his assistance with this report. On March 22nd, 2013, Officer Mike Milnor was checking out a report of missing livestock in the area around Luca Chukai, Arizona. Officer Milnor and Navajo officers joined in on the search and investigation in an attempt to find some clues as to where they could find where the animals had been taken, since there was no sign of any dead animals immediately. It wasn't long when Officer Larry Wanuka came upon heavy footprints, which would eventually conclude belonged to only one set of tracks. These tracks led them towards a valley, along two cliffs, which were close together. It was there they found where the mutilated animals had been killed and taken, their throats ripped open, and tongues removed. Officer Milnor climbed up into one of the cliff's areas, armed with his rifle, keeping watch of what he believed to be more than one of these things here. What happened next was simply amazing. The officer would tell cryptozoologists exclusively that while he was at his post, he heard the sound of something large walking towards him. He said this: "I couldn't see anything, but I kept hearing it get closer and closer. I turned on my light and saw this very large dark figure about 15 to 20 feet away." He describes it as being huge, but having nothing specific in its features. Not even eyes or a mouth, just plain skin all over its body, completely naked. No genitalia of any kind either. And once spotted, before the officer could promptly react, the being darted off. It was just a crazy moment. I've been working in the area for about 10 years now. I've never heard of or seen anything like that. I've heard of talk of skinwalkers, but I never thought that that's what they would look like, assuming that was a skinwalker. He adds that he does not believe it was a skinwalker, but admits he's not the most educated person when it comes to Navajo mythology and folklore. However, his department chief is well aware of what has been seen and states they do know who the creature might be referencing, one particular shaman. At first, we all laughed it off, Officer Milnor concludes, but after seeing what this thing did to our animals, there's no doubt in my mind, whatever this is, it does exist. Keep in mind, there's been a lot of speculation before about skinwalkers. Sure, many of the Navajo people believe them, but a lot of the state and law enforcement officials do not. Back in 2009, a video that supposedly showed one upright walking man went viral. This is apparently the first time that an officer had ever had an up-and-close personal encounter with what might be one of these creatures. The FBI put out documents back in 2011 about skinwalkers, but they were not taken seriously at all and were shut down before ever reaching mainstream media. These documents were leaked at some point, but are now almost impossible to find. The Navajo Nation Police Department, otherwise known as NNPD, was contacted for their take on the story, but no comment was made at the time of publication. Whatever the case may be, the NNPD is being very careful on what they choose to publicize and what they choose to respond to, trying to downplay any stories they are accused of. Two deputy sheriffs believe that they have seen a tall, dark figure just outside the city limits of Oceanside, California. They both stated that they were viewing this creature standing on the other side of an 8-foot-tall chain-link fence. The officers state they saw it moving its head back and forth, as if looking around at the area. This is when one of the deputies decides to go get his light for more illumination. When he returned, he says that whatever it was on the other side of the fence had moved off into some bushes out of sight range, leaving him with no idea of what he had just witnessed. Another sighting comes from two teenagers who were driving alongside Beach Boulevard in Oceanside on the 14th. They spotted what they thought was a bear on the side of the road, but this soon proved to be incorrect. One of the teens stated that he got out his light, shined it at the thing only to find that there were no eyes. This is when they both ran back to their car and took off in fear, not wanting to see any more. During November of 2012, There had also been numerous UFO sightings all across California. Could these so-called sightings be related somehow? People are always reporting strange lights over cities here in America. What makes these reports any different? What do you think about all these weird happenings taking place today? Is this some sort of warning or sign for humans? Or are people simply making these up because we're desperate for attention? They went on to mention that there were several people that had filed reports of tall, dark figures in the area. They also stated that they were not sure if these incidents were connected, but it seems highly possible since they occurred on the same day. Now, our final report comes from yet another deputy from Graham County, Arizona. He states that while he was on duty around 3 in the morning, he heard a very strange noise coming from outside this location. When he went to investigate what the sound could have been, he says there was a tall, dark figure standing out there in front of him, near an old abandoned meat facility. What makes this sighting even more interesting is that this site was surrounded by open fields and little else. There is no way possible for somebody to hide out there. So, what was this thing doing, just standing there, staring at the deputy? When asked why he didn't do anything to apprehend it or even fire upon it, he said that he felt paralyzed with fear. He claims that his mind was telling him one thing, but his body would simply not listen. This is when he went back inside the building, calling for backup. When other deputies arrived on location, they could find no sign of any type of activity taking place. There were also no footprints found near the fence line or anywhere else throughout the dirt road leading up to where this creature had been seen standing. Imagine living in a world where you fear everything around you. You never know if something is lurking in the shadows or waiting for its next victim. Those are the people who have to live with this kind of anxiety all the time. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a world where every dark corner could hold some unseen danger? What if there was something out there that was watching your every move, hiding when needed, only to return once again when you least expect it to strike without any warning? These are just some questions that many individuals could ask themselves whenever they hear stories about strange sightings taking place somewhere in or near their own city. Every day, somebody else is coming forward, claiming too that they have seen something out of this world, or not quite human in appearance. Whether these claims are true or not is anybody's guess at this point. But what if one day, whatever is hiding in those shadows decides that we are not the ones who should be living on this planet anymore? That is a very deep and creepy thought to ponder about during one's downtime. Hopefully, these stories of strange encounters will just turn out to be lurking in the shadows, and not actually be true. In 2013, Officer Torg managed to secure an actual live DNA sample from a livestock kill while investigating the supposed Lizardman case out in Bishopville, South Carolina. 8:01 a.m. He had responded to several calls of a large unknown predator supposedly killing livestock, to which he promptly responded. Upon arriving and following standard protocol for such a call, he quickly realized the severity of the situation, establishing a perimeter around the kill site to keep onlookers away. 8:20 a.m. Torg obtained saliva from an unknown source on one of the cattle. He reported that it was not possible to tell if it was human or animal. 9:30 a.m. All evidence had been gathered and moved to evidence room waiting analysis. Officer Torg will have DNA results in approximately 3 weeks, he was told. As always, we strongly urge anybody with information regarding this incident to please report to your local authorities immediately, so these investigations can be taken care of under proper jurisdiction. 2 young men also reportedly saw what they described as a lizard man along a very rural road in eastern South Carolina Sunday night. According to reports, 2 19-year-old men were driving along a stretch of highway near Bishopville, and they came upon something in the road. They turned around and saw what they described as a 7-foot-tall lizard man and quickly drove off. When asked further for comment, they both said this was no man in a costume, that this was a real-life lizard man, and must have been the same one seen back in the 80s by the young man, who had his own sighting in Skateboard Swamp in 1984. 2002. I had just responded to a call outside of Glendale, Rhode Island. We were called to the area because a hunter had been chased by what he believed was a large bat humanoid. Its face and eyes looked like a ball about 2 inches across, very bright, and seemed to be grinning at him, full of sharp teeth. The wings did not flap, but somehow glided away from the man who was still standing in amazement at what he just saw. It flew off into the trees and never came back out. I searched for over an hour, trying to find this creature without success. I heard no other sightings since then. Either there is a bit of hunting that goes on in the area throughout the year. Officer B, who will remain anonymous for this report, indicates that it wasn't something that could have easily been explained. They are very hesitant to share their full encounter due to ridicule. He did, however, describe the creature and did not indicate that it did not seem to be something that could have easily been misidentified as any known animal. Officer B has also indicated that there was also a constant stream of hunters in this area during his time of search, but no other reports were noted for this specific area at the time. He did state that he had heard stories from other officers regarding strange sightings and experiences with various large bat-like creatures all around Glendale, Rhode Island, over the course of several years, dating back prior to 2002. Of note, Officer B has indicated that they are considered by some members of law enforcement as reliable witnesses due to their hard-earned reputation for truthful reporting of facts associated with their profession. This creature's sighting remains unexplained. Officer B stated that he has seen other reports in the area and has indicated similar sightings in the general area, though no other locations in Glendale match these reports. There is also note that a man by the name of John Baglieri was doing some work in a cemetery in Glendale. He claims to have seen a large creature in one section of the cemetery back in 1994. He described it as demonic, tall, black, with large wings, claimed that it flew directly over his head. He believes it came from a portal from hell. He equates its size to be roughly 8 feet tall if standing. Though this report isn't specific to Glendale, I did extensive research for any type of flying humanoid report from all around the area, and only 3, including Officer B's sightings, popped up. All other similar sightings I located were across the country, not limited to southern New England. Officer B later sent me an email indicating that there have been other strange incidents prior to his own sighting. 2 years previously, a local youth had been severely mauled by something he described as a big hairy thing with wings. No other reports came out from the area regarding the incident. The boy was never interviewed or heard from again, although I think a large part of that is the media jumping in to shut that down before the public got word and began to mass panic. Officer B indicated that it appeared to him that law enforcement was trying their best not to mention the incident to the public. At one point or another, government officials had stepped in and took control over the case. Officer B had also contacted me later, indicating that he had also spoken to a retired officer. They said they were involved in an incident where one of their colleagues was attacked by something very large and unidentified. This was after responding to a call in the same general vicinity. This is likely what led them to investigate further when they received the initial hunter's report. I'm aware of several areas across New England and the world that have, on occasion, had incidents like these. There's usually some kind of game or animal to blame, though what is described by Officer B doesn't appear to be anything like an owl or other known species of flying animal. As always, I welcome any further information regarding this type of report. If you have experienced similar events, feel free to contact me. I'm also looking for input from individuals who are interested in real research and would enjoy being involved with a group working together on finding explanations for currently unexplained mysteries across New England and beyond. Officer B, whose name will be kept confidential to protect their employment and identity status, also indicated that immediately following the sightings, there had been government officials reporting the same thing, documented as looking like a big person with wings. Other than a few hunters who claim they've seen something large and unidentified flying around at night, nothing has been said about the incident. It is assumed that law enforcement will follow up with further investigation if they can confirm something was actually sighted that evening near Glendale. But since we are relying largely on bureaucracy, I wouldn't hold my breath. In this report, a group of 5 police officers all heard a very loud scream in the distance. One officer immediately identified it as a cougar, but when they got to investigate, they found no such cougar existed in the whole area. They know it was not a human due to its volume and inhuman nature. Second and third interviews with Gregory Riddle in this report. The witness talks about seeing an unknown animal twice from his car while driving down a road at night. He quickly gets out there after seeing the animal on both occasions. He knows something is off about it. It gives him chills just looking at it. This report also has some good information within the first interview, where the only witness discusses other cryptids that he has seen before. This is not the only sighting, but it has affected his way of thinking. Here is the first interview. January 27th, 2012. I want to report a cryptid that was seen in the vicinity of Maine on October 5th, 2010. This was around 9:35 p.m. by myself and one other person. The creature was about 8.5 feet tall or more, white or light in color. No skin, no hair. It looked almost skeletal, or as I would call, mummified. It looked very large, standing up straight. It was walking upright when we first saw it. We only caught sight of it through our headlights when we were driving on a 2-lane road right where it crossed onto another smaller road. It had been walking along the edge of the woods, disappearing into them after we saw it, before we could really get out and get a good look at it. We did not see its face or hands at this point, since it moved so quickly. We turned off our headlights and stopped near, and we lost sight of it. We could not see anything in front of us with our high beams on anyway. It surprised me when I'm driving at night with my high beams on. Nothing is too bright for me to see, even deer standing in the middle of the road, or other cars coming from behind. I told my friend that there was something big in front of us, to slow down and watch for it. After we stopped, turned off our headlights, we could see that there was something in the road, about 100 feet away from us, but could not tell what it was due to the snow on the ground, making everything appear darker than usual. It's really hard to explain. We sat there looking at it while my friend backed up slowly. It was still standing there when he had to put enough distance between us so it could not see us anymore. As I mentioned, this thing looked like a large mummified skeleton. It was easily the creepiest, most closest thing to Night of the Living Dead you can ever imagine. But it looked far more animalistic than just some huge human skeleton walking around. Either way, the whole incident took less than a couple minutes until it passed. The other interviews included in this report have been since whited out, and unfortunately am unable to be included in this database. Thank you for your understanding. I will be telling you what I saw and heard while on duty in the evening of Thursday, July 15th, 2004. I was dispatched to an area. There had been reports of a lot of screaming. Once arriving at the scene, I met with 2 other officers, who we will refer to as A and B. We proceeded into a wooded area that led out onto a street near a housing development. It was from that same location that we had heard these crazy yelling, screaming coming from behind us in the woods, just off the side of the street. They were very loud, very high-pitched. There was some lower pitches mixed in there as well. I have never heard anything like this before since being on duty here in Plymouth County. Since my partner and I were the only ones who actually heard this, we talked about it. Both of us think that we'd heard some type of Bigfoot-like creature. While not necessarily believers, we like to say we keep our options open. We had Officer C with us as well, but he never heard the screams or anything else. One other thing I'd like to add is there were no residences on the street at the time. Nothing back off the road when we first came out into the woods. There were no vehicles either. This whole area has been developed since then, though there are a few houses now back off the street where we first came out on. The noise we heard down in those woods could be best described as a long scream or yell, mixed with a howl and growl. It sent chills down my spine that night, even as a trained law enforcement official. I never saw anything like this before, and I have not seen or heard it since either. I do hope that one day I will see something like that again. I know there are certain things out there we cannot explain, and that's what makes it all the more intriguing. It should also be included that Officer A had a previous sighting of the same type of size of creature back in the early 90s. It might have been 91 or 92. I actually spoke with him about it. He described to me what he saw. It was very similar to the way I would describe our screams that evening. The most striking thing was that he just stated that it stood there staring at him for almost 10 minutes. Or so he said it felt like it, but it was probably only 30 seconds. Again, all this took place out in Plymouth County. In 1981, an officer claims that he was on patrol with another officer. They received a call about something large in a wooded area of Sand Ridge State Forest. When they went to investigate, lo and behold, they saw what appeared to be a hair-covered man standing on two legs, watching them from about 200 feet away. The creature quickly ran off into the woods before either could get a good look at it. But both stated it looked like something out of this world. The following is an excerpt from the witness's report about what happened. As we pulled up, it walked on two legs until reaching a tree, then knelt down behind it, rose up back on two legs, and continued staring at us. Officer Odia got out of the car, rifle in hand. I got out, putting my spare revolver in my waistband, pulling out my shotgun from its bracket under the dash. We both walked to the front of the cruiser, each taking a side scanning for it, when Odia said loudly, "There it is." I didn't see anything, so shouted where. He told me where it was behind a tree, about 45 yards away, crouched down, watching us. He instructed me to stay back while he approached it for a better look. Odia stated that he watched as this thing kept looking left and right, making sure nobody else was coming. Once satisfied that they were alone, it began running back towards us. That's when I took my first shot at it with my 12 gauge. It was just beginning to rise up though, so all that happened was buckshot spraying into the tree behind it. Odia then grabbed me, told me to follow him back to the car. Once we got back in the car, he told me we needed to leave now. It was very dark, but still light enough for us to see. This thing was hideous. Odia has since passed away. Before he died, though, he wanted to come out and get this story for all these years. I just never knew how or what the right time was. Most people have a hard time believing that policemen would not take into account shooting an unknown cryptid. However, when working with Odia, he claimed he would never shoot and kill a Bigfoot because there was simply too much paperwork. One of the scariest things about this whole incident is that whatever these officers saw, something using intelligence as well as somehow knowing when other people are coming. Police officers from Beaver Township, Ohio, report a bizarre bipedal creature that they witnessed in the early morning hours. On October 25th, 2018, at around 5:03 in the morning, 4 separate police officers from Beaver Police Department all had a terrifying encounter with an unknown bipedal creature. Investigators were on patrol, driving down an isolated road, known as Davis Road. They noticed something strange near the edge of the road, pulled up to see what it was. Out of nowhere, a large man-like figure appeared and stood about 7 feet tall, so close to the car they could have reached out and touched him. The officers described seeing features like a very elongated bony face, huge fangs sticking out of its mouth, and black eyes, akin to that of a shark's. Prior to the sighting, the officers noticed something moving along one of the roads in their line of sight, but they weren't exactly sure what it was. Their curiosity got the best of them, so they decided to investigate. When they reached where it had been spotted, all 4 officers were able to see the creature in full view. They described it being so close that if it wanted to, this thing looked like it was going to jump out at them. One of them said, "It was like nothing I've ever seen before," while the other officers agreed with him. According to one officer who did not want to go on camera about what he saw that morning, He knew immediately that it was not a bear or any type of person or thing. He also said it only took seconds for their eyes to adjust and see exactly what he was witnessing. It seemed as if this creature had its own light source, being able to be easily spotted as well. This is some strange stuff. Weird places are all out there. And to add to their statements, after it had disappeared into the nearby bush, 2 of the officers left their posts to join other 2 to make the group and investigate. They came up with nothing, except a large hoof mark in the area where they found some broken bones among other things. They told me that I can't find any evidence of that myself. It would have been on the news if it was proof. They informed me that there will never be evidence for such things like this, and that if it ever got on the news, it would be very quickly retracted.